I was sitting out behind the mortuary again, enjoying the sunset as I breathed in the fresh air. I could smell someone barbecuing in the trailer park not far from here, and hearing the crickets tuning up, as well as feeling the seasons change as summer began its slow decline into fall. It was still July and hot as blazes, but the evenings were beginning to become crisp, and it wouldn't be long before I might actually sit out here recreationally. I could remember Dad sitting out here sometimes, the picnic table bearing the black marks from his cigarettes and the many rings or beers gone by. I remember running out here as he grilled or just relaxed, and it almost felt like he was watching just as much as he was relaxing. The whistling came from the woods then, and I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the weather. Had that been what Dad was watching against? The can of Dr. Pepper shook a little as it came down, and I watched the woods as well as the sunset. I remember the dream then, the same dream I always had when I was stressed. I was running through the woods while something chased me. It was dark and the moon overhead a ghostly ring, and I was terrified. Behind me, someone was calling my name, but it didn't sound right. Someone else was calling my names further into the woods, and that sounded a little better. I remember running towards the voice, hearing something heavy behind me as it ate up the ground. It was nearly fall then too, I remembered, but it was just a dream. There was no way that this actually happened. Dad wouldn't let us into the woods during the daytime, and we were always away from them after dark. I remember I asked Dad once, when I suggested that we camp out there to get my campout badge in the Scouts, and he acted like I suggested a campout in hell. Absolutely not, Tyler. You must never go out there. It's very dangerous. Promise me you will never go out there. And I promised. But when I asked him why it was so dangerous, he got this look on his face that scared me. It was the same look as someone who had seen something that they could never forget. There's something out there that hates us. It hates us for what we are and what we took away from it. And it wants to take things from us in return. What did it want to take from us? I asked. But he just shook his head and said that it didn't matter. It was a long time ago, but it still holds a grudge. Time doesn't mean much to it, and this thing has a long time to wait. The limbs of the trees grabbed at me, just like Snow White in her fairy tale would, and I was terrified, my bare feet slapping on the ground, and when someone rose up before me, I screamed and put my hands out so that way I didn't crash into them and hurt myself. It was Dad, and he was shaking as he held me tight. I was crying and apologizing, trying to figure out why I was here, but he just soothed me and said that it was okay and that everything would be all right. Then he looked behind me and told me not to look and shouted at whatever it was to get away because I was standing in the parking lot. The whistling came in short bursts like someone calling a dog. I could see the sun sinking low, see the woods on east 15 feet away, and ran back to the mortuary as fast as I could. I got to the door when someone came crunching out of the woods, and I turned and wondered if it might not be what had chased me through the dreams. Unlike my dreams, the woods were lush and green, and the sounds of breaking limbs and stirred up leaves were not as loud as they would have been in another month. It didn't sound terribly large, not like the creature in my dreams, but as it stumbled out of the woods, I was still tempted to slam the door and stay inside. I remembered the lessons of Mrs. Black from not too long ago, but it was a lesson that I forgot quickly when I saw the man staggering out into the late day sun. He was stocky, his dark hair cut short and interlaced with salt and pepper. He was wearing a suit which I thought was weird for forest travel. He was barefoot too, something else that seemed off. I took a step towards him, meaning to go to his aid. But I remembered the warnings about whistlers at dusk and took another step back towards the door, when a far too familiar voice cut across the fear, and I felt something different well up in me. It was the hope that I wasn't going insane. "Help me," he stammered, his hands over his face. "Won't someone help me?" I took a tentative step towards him as he walked from the forest to the asphalt, and I seemed unable to close my mouth. It couldn't be. There's no way that it could be him. Sir, are you okay? Do you need help? But he looked up then, and I saw him look at me with surprised realization. Tyler? Tyler, is that you? I don't know what's going on, boy, but I need help. Please, help me. I seem to have gotten turned around. How had I not recognized that suit? It was the one that I had put him in the ground in. He still wore the slight blush on his cheeks that I had applied there, and I wondered if the stitching would still be across his chest where the coroner had removed his organs. This man that was walking into my parking lot could not be here. He was dead. I had put him in the ground, and yet here he was. Dad, I half whispered, not sure what to make of this. Tyler. Well, don't just stand there, boy. Help me inside. I need to get out of these dirty clothes and... I had wrapped him in a hug, my tears mingling with the dirt on his suit. If this was a trap, then this was a perfect one. My dad, he was back. I couldn't believe it. It defied all logic, but I knew my dad's voice, his mannerisms, the very aura that he produced, and I knew that this had to be him. He still smelled like the Old Spice that I had dabbed on him at his funeral. And that made me cry all the much harder. Dad, I sobbed, and when his arms settled around me, it felt so right. It's me, kiddo. I'm back. I made an unhappy noise into the phone as I hung it up, turning back to Dad as he sat at the kitchen table. He looked good. You know, for a dead guy. Sorry, Dad. Mom went on a bus trip for the weekend. I wish that she was here. I knew that she would want to see you. I sat down across from him and smiled as he looked around like he had never seen the place. He bumped his hands against the table, making a little beat as he looked around, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. This was so weird. I couldn't believe this. I had never thought that I would see my dad again, and here he was, sitting in Mom's kitchen like he never left. So, I asked, sitting forward. What are you, exactly, Dad? Are you now a ghost, or are you a zombie, a ghoul, or something? And Dad just shrugged. I don't know. I just woke up in the woods a couple days ago. I wandered around for a while and I finally ended up here. He looked lost for a moment, and that was the worst of it. Dad had always been our rock, and the thought of him being unsure of what was going on was a little bit terrifying. Did something happen to me? And I started to explain to him that he had died, that he had been buried in the ground and left me his mortuary, that I had been on a strange and sometimes terrifying journey. But I just shook my head and decided to tell him none of that. You're home, Dad, and that is all that matters. And he smiled, patting the back of my hand as he nodded. I had to make a concerted effort not to pull my hand away. His fingers, they were so cold, they were like ice. Are you hungry? I asked, getting up and walking to the fridge. Mom left me a whole pan of lasagna, but we have other stuff if you like. I jumped a little when I glanced up and had found him standing next to me. Jesus, he was quiet. Oh, that looks good, he said, reaching into the freezer door and taking out a butcher pan of ground beef. I mean, I'll need to defrost it first, but then I heard the crunch of his teeth going into the frozen meat. I turned to find him chewing on the beef like a kid with an ice cream cone. Little bits of meat were falling to the ground, frozen strands that collected around his feet. And when he looked up, I swear that there was like this strange gleam in his eye. He held it out to me, offering me some, but I shook my head and I told him that I just would have some that came in the lasagna. It was hard not to wince as I listened to the breaking of the ice and the crunch of frozen meat. I was kind of glad when he was done by the time that I got back to the table. I just ate my lukewarm lasagna as he just sat there and held the empty butcher pan like he wasn't sure what to do with it. I'd always heard that people could be a little bit confused after something traumatic, but I really didn't have much reference for something like this. Maybe he was a ghoul now or something. It would certainly explain the raw meat, but I didn't think that ghouls just happened randomly. I didn't really know how they happened, but I was willing to bet that it wasn't just some spontaneous resurrection. I finished my meal and I put my plate into the sink, turning back to Dad as I tried to figure out what to do now. "You'd probably like to get cleaned up now, huh?" I said, remembering that he was wearing a filthy suit that was covered in grave dirt. "Come on, I think Mom still has some of your old clothes in her room." She did, and I soon had him in more comfy clothes, a towel, and some underwear. He looked at their bathroom the same way that he looked at the kitchen, and that also seemed weird. Dad had been here when the bedroom belonged to his parents and had slept here with Mom for decades, but he looked around as if it was the first time that he had ever seen the place. I put the clothes in his hands and steered him towards the bathroom, where he just stood there as I stood in the doorway. "Are you gonna be able to manage?" I asked, not sure if I needed to turn the shower on for him. "I think so," he said, reaching into the shower and turning on the knob as he put the clothes on the lid of the toilet. "Well, if you need any help, just let me know. I'll give you a little privacy." I picked up the phone as the shower pattered behind me and I tried to call Mom again. I sighed as it rang and rang, hoping nothing was wrong. She should be here. She should see this too. Mom had missed Dad as much as I had, and I knew that she would probably want to drive home tonight if she knew that he was somehow back. The thought of Mom hijacking a bus was pretty funny, and as it went to voicemail, I stepped into the living room to leave my message. "Hey Mom, call me back as soon as you get this. Something amazing has happened. Dad's home. I know you'll want to see it, or at least hear about it, so just please call me back. I love you. Bye." I texted her a similar message, and as the shower stopped and the door came open, I couldn't help but chuckle. He had the shirt on backwards, and the one that proclaimed him as the world's best grandpa, and his gray sleep pants looked baggy on him as he shuffled out. Had he lost weight in the ground? I didn't see how he could have, but I guess anything was possible. "So, what do you want to do? Do you just want to hang out? Do you want to watch a movie?" I asked him, patting his old lazy boy as he came over to get comfy. "Sure," he said, sitting down in the creaky old chair and just getting comfy. "Hey, can we watch that one with the cowboys? I always liked that one. What was it called? Graveyard or Headstone?" "Tombstone," I said, and he nodded happily as I went to the rack and found the DVD. We spent the next few hours watching Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp clean up Tombstone and parts of outside of Tombstone, but sometimes around the big town with Johnny Ringo, and I must have dozed off. I woke up to the title screen playing soft background music, and my dad's empty chair. He was gone, and I suddenly wondered if I had been dreaming the whole thing. I went to look around my parents' room, but it was empty. Ditto to the kitchen as well as the guest rooms, but I saw that the door down to the mortuary was slightly ajar, and I wanted to see if maybe he had gone downstairs to see the showroom. The mortuary was dark, and the caskets casting strange shadows across the carpet as I went to check the office. He wasn't there either, nor was he in the fellowship hall. And I was about to check outside when I saw the door to the basement was also open. I didn't know why he wanted to go down to the prep room, but I suppose that it was as good as a place as any. I came quietly down the stairs, watching the ghostly glow of the overhead lights as they cast his shadow tall across the wall. There was mist coming from the room, and it looked like he had the freezers open. I came to the foot of the stairs and glanced in, watching him look down at the 3 bodies that I had been preparing. 2 of them were going to other funeral homes for services, but Mrs. Friedman was going to have her services right here before being interned in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And he was bent over her. His face was very close to hers, and I saw something glistening on his cheek. It looked like spittle, but I realized that he was drooling. Dad? I asked, and he straightened, looking guilty at me. Then he glanced around, looking like a lost child, and said, "Where am I? I must have gotten turned around. Tyler, could you help me back upstairs, son?" I stood there, thinking about what I had just seen and hoping that maybe I had been mistaken. I took him by the hand, pushing the drawers back in and turning off the lights. We went back upstairs to the house and I helped him get into the big queen-sized bed that he had shared with Mom. We told each other goodnight and I closed the door and I left him there. I sat in my own bed for a while, listening for him if he should try to get up, but he never did. I must have dozed off a little at some point though, because I woke up in the morning as all hell had broke loose. I woke up to something screaming and someone else begging them to calm down. I was out of bed and running down the hall to find my dad cowering in the living room as my mom pointed a knife to him. She was shrieking at him to get the hell out, and he was just stuttering and looking confused. He had some defensive cuts on his arms, the skin in tatters, and he was crying as he begged her to stop. They both looked up as I came in, and Mom seemed madder at me than Dad. "Tyler, what the hell is this thing doing in our home?" I squinted at her, getting mad as she sat and railed at me over helping my dad. "It's Dad, Mom. He's come back." "What do you mean he's come back?" "My love, let me," he started, but she brandished the knife at him and he fell silent. "I don't want anything out of you. Sit down and shut up. You do not have a place here, and you are not my husband." "Mom, what are you saying? This is Dad. He's come back to us. I thought that you would be thrilled." She looked distrustfully between the two of us, finally settling on me, though her eyes flicked back to him more than once. "Where did you find him?" He came out of the woods. He just kind of stumbled in the same suit that we buried him in." "Listen to me, and listen to me good," she said, her voice deathly quiet. "This is not your father. This is something pretending to be your father. We need to get out of here before it decides to stop pretending to be human. We need to call Father Pierce so that way he can come down and get rid of this thing before it kills someone." I was speechless as I took this in, shaking my head as I cleared my throat and answered, "No." She looked at me in disbelief, and I realized it was the first time that I had ever told my mother no. Not since I was a toddler and ever told her no. "What? What do you mean no? Tyler, that thing is my dad. We have a chance to be a family again. I don't know how it happened, but this is a second chance, and I can't believe that you were acting like this." She was breathing heavily now, but as she tried to regain some of her composure, Dad made to scoot around the table, and she pointed the knife to him again. He stopped, putting his hands up as he went still, and she looked back at me with all the patience and resolve that she could muster. "Tyler, I know that you miss your father, but this is not him. Please, please, my son. We have to get rid of it before something terrible happens." I just shook my head slowly, trying to negate what she was saying. "I have seen a lot of weird stuff in the past few months, Mom. Is it so outlandish of an idea that Dad has come back? You said that it wasn't his time. Maybe someone had sent him back to us." Her head shake was just as slow, just as deliberate, but she never took her eyes off of Dad. "Not if he came from the forest," my mother said in a low and slightly creepy tone. "I did not grow up around here. I met your father in college, but he told me when we came here that none of our children will ever go into the woods. Day or night, those woods were off limits. I had asked him why, and he said that the woods behind the mortuary were tainted. Something lived there. Something awful. And if whatever it is there came out of the woods, then it isn't anything that you want in the house. Get out, Tyler. Get out while you still can. I will hold it off while you... But I had heard enough. I stepped in close where she was looking at Dad and tried to grab her wrist to get the knife away from her. In her current state, I was more afraid that she would hurt herself more than anyone else. But it appeared that I was wrong. I winced in pain as the knife slid across the meat of my forearm, and as the blood rolled down my elbow, I took the knife from her and she let me have it after realizing that she had cut me. She put her hands to her face, and before I could stop, she was running from the bedroom. The door slammed behind her, and I put the knife into the sink and I started to try to fix myself up. Dad was still cowering under the table, looking at the blood with fascination as I took down the first aid kit. I grabbed the phone too, calling for an ambulance and maybe for a patrol car. I hated to do it, but she hadn't really left me any choice. I got that the situation was pretty jarring, but I couldn't just have her here threatening Dad with a knife. She had also cut me, and though I didn't want to press charges, I wanted her somewhere that she could process this safely. It had surprised me too, but I was worried that Mom might have a mental breakdown at the sight of her dead husband walking around again. I decided to put Dad in the bathroom, not thinking that it was a good idea for the police to see a dead guy wandering around the house. And when they came, I told them the slightly abridged version of the story. Mom had come home, mistook me for a burglar, and had attacked me with a knife. She sure was sorry when she realized that it was me, but she was rattled and just needed a place that she could quietly process what had happened. When they talked to her and she explained that a creature was in her house, it was a little bit easier to believe that she might be in danger to people. "We'll take her to the hospital," the officer said. "Keep her there for a 72-hour observation and see what the doctors think. Given your mother's age, I hope it isn't anything too serious." As it turns out, the police were actually already looking for her. Mom had damaged her phone somehow on the church trip, but had managed to get it working so that way she could check her voicemail last night. She heard it and then borrowed someone's van who had driven up there. She'd driven several thousand miles straight just to get here, and they guessed, mistook me for a burglar. It broke my heart to see how frail she looked as they let her out. They had saved her the indignity of cuffs, and it was a good thing that Mrs. Reed hadn't pressed charges over her van either. They thought that maybe something had set her off, maybe her having a mental breakdown, and now she was just coming out of a bad spell. She turned as they let her out, and her eyes were so earnest that it almost made me rethink my stance on the situation. "Tyler, you have to get out of here. Go to Father Pierce and ask him about what is going on. But for God's sake, my son, do not stay here, I beg you. I don't know what I would do if it hurt you." She started crying then, and as they let her out, they assured me that she would get the help that she needed. After they had driven away, I went to the bathroom to see to Dad's injuries, but he was gone. There was no way that he could have left. He would have to sneak past me and the two cops, and even so, he was still gone. And as I looked for him, I think I suspected where I might find him. I remembered the night before, but I put it out of my mind as a fluke. He had to have been sleepwalking, that was all. There was nothing sinister about it. I had been half asleep myself, and maybe I had seen things that weren't there. I couldn't help but remember Mom's words as I looked for him. And the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I wondered if I acted out of haste. Hadn't I been suspicious before I'd seen Dad's face? Hadn't I just been thinking about my dream and running through the woods as I was pursued? Was I about to walk into something like last night? Was I about to find myself in something that I had overlooked again if it meant having my dad back? I didn't know. But as my hand settled around the knob, the door was suddenly opened as Dad stepped out and closed it behind him. "Oh, there you are," I said with some relief. What were you doing down there?" He held up his arms, showing me the bandages and smiling. "Just patching myself up. Is your mother okay? I don't think that I've ever seen her like that before." I nodded, feeling a little better now that I saw more of the old Dad that I had known as a kid. "Yeah, she will be. I know that she just needs some time to process this. The paramedics suggested that she just take some time in the hospital so that way they could check her out and make sure that she was okay. I guess it's just us till then." He nodded with a smile. "Well, what shall we do today?" "Well," I said, trying to step around him, "I really need to get down there so I can do some..." "Oh, but it's such a nice day. Why don't we do something fun?" he said, smiling hugely. And that was hard for me to ignore, because it was something that I had not seen for far too long. And so we went fishing. Dad had loved fishing, though it was something that he hadn't got to do often enough. And I felt a little guilty about ditching my duties until we were out on the lake, but once our bobbers were in that water and our rented boat was drifting along, I began to remember why I had liked to fish as well. Dad was pulling them in with gusto, and I wasn't doing too bad either. We had a bucket full after a while, putting some back and taking some home for dinner. We stopped for some supplies, and that was when Dad surprised me with something that I hadn't seen since I was in high school: a fish fry. He fried them in the back by the picnic table, drinking a soda and smiling as he munched fish with me. And I tried to ignore the fact that he was eating them, bones and all, and I just figured that it was part of who he was now. This was the start of it, and I hardly noticed that he took me away from the work that I had loved so much. There was always an excuse for not going into the basement. There was always something to do or somewhere to go, and I had to admit that it was nice to spend time with Dad. I didn't think about it at first. I was just having fun, but by day 3, I knew I had to get those bodies ready for the funeral home to come to get them. Dad had disappeared when I woke up, my eyes coming open before the sun was more than an idea on the horizon, and I assumed that he was asleep in his bed when I didn't find him in the living room or in the kitchen. I was kind of surprised since Dad didn't seem to sleep like he used to. Sometimes I would wake up in the night and find him in front of the TV or eating something out of the fridge that wasn't exactly normal. One night he had been crunching on a frozen ham, and when I offered to cook it for him, he said that it was fine like this. I made my way down to the basement, wanting to make sure that everything was fine before the chariot arrived. And that was when I heard it. It was a chomping sound, like hogs feeding. And as I headed into the basement, I saw why Dad had been keeping me out. The door to the outside was open, a slight light spilling in, looking strange down there. And the sound was louder now, like dogs eating a fresh kill. And I came in slowly, peeking around the corner as I had the first night. And what I saw made me slap my hand over my mouth so that way they didn't hear my scream and get to me too. They were dark, shaggy-looking things. Their heads like animal heads on human bodies. There was a wolf and a deer. They were eating. Really going to town on the bodies in my cooler. And presiding over them was my dad. He was naked, but his back looked like something had hollowed him out and then tried to close his skin with twine. He was beseeching them to eat their fill, to take the bounty of his table. And as they ate, I saw something terrifying in the holes that the twine hadn't quite closed up. Something moved beneath his skin. Something huge and furry. And it was like watching bugs move in a corpse. I backed around the corner, praying it hadn't seen me, and realized that Mom had been right. I had wanted him back so badly that I had ignored the signs. And now he was here. The thing from the woods. And I remembered again that voice that had asked what he would give up to keep me safe. Anything, Dad had said. And it appeared that now they had taken everything. I was up the stairs and out into the parking lot, not caring how much noise I had made. I cranked my car, but I guessed that he had heard me after all. The headlights illuminated my father still naked as his skin writhed madly, and when I slammed on the gas, I thought for sure that I was about to run him down. Instead, he jumped over my car as I shot down out of the lot, and I saw him chasing me as I sped down the road. I needed to get help. I needed to get somewhere safe. I needed to find a place to regroup before my dad or whatever was pretending to be him ran down and killed me. Call Father Pierce and get his help, Mom had said, and I knew where I needed to go. Dad had followed me until I whipped into the parking lot of St. Maribel of the Faith Church. And it stopped at the border, the consecrated ground forcing it to give up its chase since it couldn't step foot on the grounds. It watched me as I pounded on the door of the church, calling for Father Thomas to help me. The priest was very grumpy when he got up, and as he rushed in, he caught sight of my father and locked the door behind me. "What was that?" he started, but I nodded as I collapsed on the carpet and begged him for help. "I think that something is wearing my father's skin, and it is infiltrated the mortuary." Father Thomas sighed and said the last thing that I would have ever expected a priest to say in the house of God. "Fucking skinwalkers."